What types of exceptions should you catch? When catching an exception, it's generally considered a good idea to only catch exceptions if you understand their origin. This code catches a value error, a type error, a key error, and a name error exception, and it's not entirely clear why it catches each of these types of exceptions. I can tell you that quickly looking at this, we probably shouldn't be catching a name error exception at all, because name error exceptions are usually raised when a variable name has been misspelled, which means this actually isn't a bug in data sent from an end user. This is a bug in our code that we're suppressing here. So we will stop catching a name error exception immediately. Now, a value error exception can be raised if our CSV file has some invalid data in it. Specifically, if an invalid date is on a row in our CSV file. So here you can see we had an invalid date on one of the lines in our file. So a value error was raised. A type error can also be raised if we have missing dates in our CSV file. So we have a couple rows in our file that simply don't have some of our columns. The start and end columns are missing on some rows in this file. A key error is raised in kind of an odd situation. A key error is raised if our CSV file has a typo in a header. So here start is spelled with a capital S instead of a lowercase s, which makes it seem like there's a problem in every row in our file, but there's not. The problem is really with our header. So it might actually be better if we didn't catch a key error exception at all, because the traceback that would be shown to the end user would actually be more clear. It would show that there's some kind of problem with the word start. And you can see it's with a lowercase s here, but it's an uppercase S in our headers. So this traceback isn't particularly clear, but it is more clear than the error message we were showing before. Better than not catching a key error at all, though, would be not catching a key error and instead handling this problem with our headers before we even start looping. Because really the issue isn't with each row in our file, it's just with the first row. So we'll check our headers to see if we have a header that's missing that we expect to see, and if we have a missing header, we'll print out an error message and then exit our program, which is a lot friendlier for our end users. So you really shouldn't catch all possible exceptions that your program could raise. Some exceptions are better left unhandled, or better handled preemptively, without actual exception handling. There are sometimes cases, though, for catching exceptions that aren't very specific types, and instead casting a wide net and catching all possible types of exceptions that could be raised. For example, in this code here, we're looping over lots of file paths. If an error occurs while we process one of these files, counting the lines within it, we don't want to stop our loop suddenly and end our program. We'd instead like to print out that we had an error processing one of the files and then continue onward to the next file. That ends up with a much friendlier user experience. So we're doing this by catching any possible type of exception that could be raised. This is one of those situations where it might actually make sense to do this, because this is kind of mission critical code. It's code that we wouldn't want to halt our program simply because there's an error in this block of code. The trickiest programming bugs are often caused by catching exceptions that you didn't mean to catch, or handling exceptions in ways that obfuscate the actual error that's occurring. In general, you should try to make sure that you're only catching specific exceptions, the specific exceptions that your code might raise, and that you understand when your code would raise such an exception. The one big exception to this is mission-critical parts of your code, in which case you might want to catch all possible types of exceptions that might be raised and then log them for later.